Hello, everyone. I am the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The wind whispered over the emerald hills of Irene, rustling the tall grass like the breath of unseen spirits. Condla sat alone atop the hill of Usnich, where the sky stretched endlessly above him, a vast canvas dusted with silver stars. The night air carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, cool against his skin, but within him, a quiet storm raged. He had always felt this strange restlessness, as if some part of his soul belonged not to this world, but to another just beyond the horizon. He traced patterns in the dirt absent-mindedly, his mind caught between duty and desire. Son of Finn of the 100 Battles, he was born into a legacy of warriors and kings. His father had carved his name into history with blood and steel, and Condla was expected to follow. He had trained with the finest warriors, wielded swords that sang through the air, and led men into battle with unwavering resolve. And yet, beneath the armor and honor, he felt like a stranger in his own skin. Every path before him was already paved, every choice made for him before he could even ask what his own heart desired. Here on the hilltop, away from the weight of expectation, he could breathe. The world stretched vast and endless before him, a place of possibility rather than duty. It was here that dreams came unbidden, slipping into his thoughts like echoes from another life. He dreamt of lands unseen, where men did not carry swords, and where peace did not come as an afterthought to war. He imagined a place beyond time, untouched by sorrow, a world that called to him in whispers he could not name. And tonight, the whispers felt louder. The air around him grew thick with something unseen, humming with a presence that sent a shiver along his spine. The stars above seemed to gleam brighter, the night deepening into a silence so profound it felt sacred. Then, from the shadows of the trees at the edge of the hill, she appeared. She moved as if she were part of the night itself, stepping into the moonlight with an effortless grace. Her dress shimmered like woven starlight, flowing with the movement of the wind, and her hair cascaded down her back like dark silk laced with silver threads. But it was her eyes that held him captive, ancient yet young, knowing yet kind, reflecting entire worlds within them. Condla, she spoke, his name a melody upon her lips, his breath caught in his throat. He had never seen her before, yet something about her was familiar, as though she had stepped out of the very dreams that haunted him. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. She smiled, tilting her head as if amused by the question. "I come from a place beyond the reach of mortal men," she said, her voice like the rustling of leaves, soft yet rich with power. "A land untouched by sorrow, where time flows like a gentle river, and no burden weighs heavy upon the soul. It is called Tur na en Og, the land of the ever-living. And I have come to you, Conla, because you do not belong to this world alone. His heart pounded, a mixture of awe and yearning washing over him. He had heard the old stories of Tur na en Og, a land where youth never fades and joy knows no end. Legends whispered of those who had been taken there, never to return, yet never to regret their departure. You call to me as if you have always known me, he said, his voice steadier now, though wonder still laced its edges. Why? Her gaze softened. Because I have, she answered simply. You are different from the men of your world, Conla. You are not meant for the weight of steel and the thirst of war. In Tur na en Og, you would be free. Free to roam, to dream, to live without the burdens that chain your heart. And I would be there beside you, always. The words wrapped around him like a spell, filling the hollow places in his soul with a promise that felt more real than anything he had ever known. A life without sorrow, without duty, without the ever-present expectation to be something he was not. It was a temptation unlike any he had ever faced, a dream so vivid he could almost touch it. But why me? He asked, searching her eyes for some answer beyond mere enchantment. Of all the men in my father's land, why have you chosen me? She stepped closer, the silver glow of the stars casting an ethereal light over her face. Because you have always longed for more, she murmured. You feel it, do you not? That pull beyond the world you know, the restlessness in your heart, the longing in your soul. Tur na en Og has called to you since the day you were born. And now, I have come to guide you there. The night closed in around them, silent, but for the steady beat of his heart. He wanted to deny it, to push away the truth of her words, but deep down, he knew. He had always known. I will return, Conla, she whispered, taking a step back into the shadows, her presence fading like mist beneath the morning sun. And when I do, I will ask if you are ready. And just like that, she was gone. The stars remained. The wind still whispered, but the night was forever changed. Conla stood upon the hill, staring into the darkness where she had been, his mind and soul unraveling beneath the weight of her promise. For the first time, he felt as though he had glimpsed the path he was meant to walk, a path not forged by war or duty, but by something far greater, something just beyond the veil of the mortal world. And he knew deep in his heart that he would wait for her, no matter what. Days passed, but Conla's thoughts remained bound to that night on the hill. He walked through his father's hall like a ghost, his body present, but his mind lost in the echo of her voice. Every sound around him, the clash of swords in the training yard, the murmur of warriors sharing stories by the fire, the solemn discussions of council seemed muted, insignificant. His world, once solid and certain, had become a mere shadow of something greater. He carried the weight of her promise in his chest, feeling it like a silent drumbeat against his ribs. Tur na en Og awaited him. She would return. He had no doubt of that now. The question that haunted him was not if she would come back, but whether he would be ready when she did. His father, Finn, watched him closely. A man of iron and instinct, Finn had waged countless battles and won them all. Yet the fight he now faced was unlike any other. He did not understand the enemy that had ensnared his son, not a blade-wielding foe or an invading army, but something unseen, something that called to Conla in whispers Finn could not hear. One morning, as the fires still smoldered from the previous night's feasting, Finn sat at the great oak table, his hands clasped before him. Conla entered the hall, moving with an uncharacteristic quiet, lost in his own thoughts. "Sit, my son," Finn said, his deep voice steady, though edged with something close to concern. Conla hesitated for only a moment before lowering himself onto the bench opposite his father. Finn studied him, his sharp gaze searching for answers in the silence that stretched between them. "There is something different about you," Finn said at last, his tone measured. "Something I cannot name." Conla met his father's eyes, struggling to find the words to explain. How could he? How could he describe a world he had only glimpsed in the eyes of a woman not of this earth? How could he make his father understand a longing that had no name? "I have seen something," he admitted. Or perhaps someone. Finn's expression darkened. "A woman." "Yes." Silence settled heavy between them. The flickering torchlight cast deep shadows across Finn's weathered face, his features carved with years of battle and burden. He had always spoken little, but expected much, and Conla had spent his life living beneath the weight of that expectation. Finn leaned forward, his voice low. "Tell me." So Conla did. He spoke of the hill, of the woman who appeared like a vision woven from moonlight and shadow. He told of her promise, a land beyond sorrow, beyond pain, beyond duty. A land where he could be free. Finn listened, his face unreadable. But when Conla finished, his father let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "This is folly, my son." Conla's jaw tightened. "You don't believe me." "I believe that you believe," Finn said carefully. "But that does not make it real." He leaned back, folding his arms. "A man who fights in the dark will always mistake shadows for ghosts." She was no shadow. Finn's lips pressed into a thin line. "You speak of a land where no sorrow touches the soul, where men live without burden or care. Tell me, Conla, do you think such a place could truly exist? Every man who has walked this earth has known pain. It is the weight of life itself." Conla clenched his fists beneath the table. "What if it doesn't have to be?" Finn studied him for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he shook his head. "And what of your people? The warriors who would follow you into battle? The men who look to you as their leader? Would you cast them aside for a dream?" A sharp pang shot through Conla's chest, but he refused to look away. "I never asked to be their leader." Finn's expression darkened, his voice turning to steel. "You are my son. That is not a choice you were given." Conla held his father's gaze, something raw and unspoken passing between them. He had always known the path laid before him, carved in the blood and sacrifice of those who came before. But now, for the first time, he saw another road, and it terrified him as much as it thrilled him. Finn exhaled, his expression softening just slightly. "This woman," he said, voice measured, "she will come again." "Yes." Finn was silent for a long moment before nodding. "Then we will see if anyone else lays eyes upon her." Condla frowned. "What do you mean?" Finn rose from his seat, his towering presence casting a long shadow across the hall. "Tonight, I will have men watch the hill. If she is real, they will see her too." A chill ran through Condla. He wanted to protest, to tell his father that the woman was not something to be hunted or caught. But he knew Finn would not be swayed. And part of him, however small, wondered what would happen if she came, and others could see her too. So he said nothing. That night, Condla returned to the hill, as he had every night before. But this time, he was not alone. Hidden among the trees, warriors of Finn's court stood watch, silent as the night itself. If the woman returned, they would see her. If she was real, truly real, they would know. He waited, the stars wheeling above him in their slow celestial dance. The world held its breath, the air thick with anticipation. And then she came. She stepped out of the darkness like a dream made flesh, her presence washing over him in a tide of warmth and longing. She was as radiant as he remembered, her dress shimmering, her hair flowing like the night itself. And her eyes gods, her eyes held him in place, as if nothing else in the world existed but her. "Condla," she whispered, smiling. "You waited." His heart pounded. Of course. She stepped closer, reaching out, her fingertips grazing his hand. "Come with me," she urged, her voice a melody of longing and promise. "Come to Tur Na En Og. Leave behind the weight of this world and step into one that is truly yours." Everything in him screamed to say yes. To take her hand, to leave behind the doubts, the duty, the expectations. But before he could answer, a sharp sound cut through the night, the sudden shifting of armor, the snap of a twig beneath a warrior's foot. Condla turned, breath catching, and saw nothing. His father's men stood hidden in the trees, silent, unmoving. But their eyes wide with confusion, with unease, told him everything. They saw nothing. Condla turned back to the woman, his pulse racing. "They don't see you." Her smile did not falter. "Only those who are meant to." A terrible, twisting feeling gripped his chest. He had never doubted her, not truly. But now, faced with the weight of what it meant, he felt the first flicker of fear. She stepped closer, her voice gentle but insistent. "You do not belong to them, Condla. You belong to me." The stars above burned bright, the night holding its breath once more, and Condla, standing between two worlds, knew that whatever choice he made tonight would change him forever. The air around him felt charged, thick unseen power. Condla's heart pounded, caught between the piercing silence of his father's men, hidden in the shadows, and the soft, steady call of the woman standing before him. She was close now, so close he could see the faint shimmer of starlight on her skin, could feel the warmth of her presence like the first touch of dawn on a winter morning. "You belong to me," she had said. And God's help him, some part of him already knew it to be true, but behind him, unseen eyes watched. Men who trusted him, who had fought beside him, who looked to him as their future leader. If he stepped forward now, if he reached for her, what would they see? A madman grasping at empty air, a warrior bewitched, lured into the unknown by a spirit no one else could perceive, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Why can they not see you?" he asked, his voice low, trembling at the edges. The woman tilted her head slightly, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. "Because they are not meant to," she said simply. "This world is theirs, Condla. They are bound to it, their lives written in the dust and blood of the earth. But you were born for something more." He swallowed hard. "And if I go with you," her lips parted, a slow smile forming, "then you will know a life without sorrow, without fear, without death." The words curled around him, tempting and insidious. No sorrow, no fear, no death. He thought of his father, of the scars on his hands, the weight he carried in his every breath. He thought of the men who trained from childhood only to die with blades in their bellies and battle cries on their lips. He thought of the long line of warriors before him, their names carved into history at the cost of their own fleeting, fragile lives. And then he thought of himself, standing alone in the vast emptiness of this world, never quite belonging. The weight of it was crushing, but still something held him back. "My father will not let me go," he whispered, half to himself. She took another step forward, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, gentler, but no less powerful. "Your father does not own your soul, Condla. No man does." He exhaled shakily, glancing toward the trees, knowing the warriors lay hidden in the shadows. They saw only him, standing alone on the hilltop, speaking to nothing. And he knew with a terrible, gnawing certainty that they would tell Finn everything. His father would hear of this, and he would not be pleased. The woman must have sensed his hesitation, because she reached into the folds of her shimmering gown and drew something out. A small, glistening fruit rested in her palm, an apple, round and flawless, its skin a deep crimson that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. She held it out to him, her eyes never leaving his. "Take this," she murmured. "Eat, and you will never hunger. You will never thirst. You will carry a piece of Tur na en Og within you until the day you choose to come to me." His breath hitched. He hesitated, staring at the apple, feeling the pulse of something strange and powerful radiating from it. He knew deep in his bones, in the marrow of his being, that if he took it, he would never be the same again. Slowly he reached out, His fingers brushed the smooth, cool surface of the fruit, and the moment he made contact, warmth flooded through him. It was like the kiss of the sun after a bitter winter, like stepping into the embrace of something ancient and eternal. His doubts, his fears, the heavy weight of this world, they all melted away. He lifted the apple to his lips and took a bite. The taste was unlike anything he had ever known. Sweet and rich, yet light as air, bursting across his tongue with a flavor that felt like laughter, like joy, like the very essence of something untouched by sorrow. He swallowed, and the warmth spread through his limbs, filling him with a quiet, unshakable peace. The woman smiled, watching him. "Now," she whispered, "you are bound to me." A gust of wind swept over the hilltop, rustling the grass and sending a shiver down his spine. He turned toward the trees, toward the men hidden in the shadows, suddenly aware of how still they had become. Something had changed. He could feel it. His father's warriors, the men who had been sent to watch, remained silent. They had seen nothing, yet they had witnessed everything. They had seen him reach for something invisible, seen him bring an unseen object to his lips, seen the way his body trembled at the taste of something that should not have been there. Condla swallowed hard, suddenly uncertain. The woman's voice drifted toward him like a sigh. "I will return," she murmured, "and when I do, you will know it is time." And then she was gone. The night stretched still and empty around him. The only sound the whisper of the wind through the grass. The apple in his hand was real, tangible, the only proof that she had been here at all. He looked down at it, the single bite he had taken still fresh upon its surface. Yet the fruit itself remained whole, unblemished, untouched, as if it had never been bitten at all. A deep unease settled over him. He turned and made his way down the hill, his legs feeling strangely light beneath him, his heart pounding with something he could not name. When he reached the gates of his father's hall, Finn was already waiting. The firelight cast deep shadows over his face, his expression unreadable. Behind him stood the men who had been sent to watch, their gazes sharp, uncertain, full of something dangerously close to fear. Condla came to a stop before his father. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Finn's voice, low and steady, cut through the silence. "Tell me, my son," he said, his eyes dark as storm clouds. "What have you done?" The fire crackled low in the great hall, casting shifting shadows against the stone walls. The scent of burning peat lingered in the air, thick and heavy. Condla sat across from his father, the weight of Finn's stare pressing down on him like the iron grip of battle. The warriors who had stood watch on the hill remained silent, their faces unreadable, their presence a reminder that Condla's actions had not gone unseen. On the table between them lay the apple, unblemished, untouched, as if he had never taken a bite. Finn's fingers drummed slowly against the wood, his gaze unwavering. "Tell me, my son," he repeated, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of command. "What have you done?" Conla's mouth was dry. He looked down at the apple, the warmth of it still lingering in his hand, as if it pulsed with a quiet, secret energy. He could still taste it on his tongue, the lingering sweetness, unlike anything he had ever known. "I have accepted a gift," he said at last. Finn's expression remained unchanged. "From whom?" Conla hesitated. He could lie. He could tell his father it had been nothing but a dream, a trick of the night. But the words would not come. He had made his choice when he took that first bite. There was no going back now. "From her," he said, "the woman on the hill." A muscle in Finn's jaw tightened. The woman no one else could see. Conla's stomach churned. Yes. At that, Finn let out a slow, measured breath. He leaned back in his chair, his hands pressing together before him. "Do you know what you have done?" Conla frowned. You have tied yourself to something beyond this world," Finn interrupted, his voice colder now. "You have accepted a gift from one of the Ow's She." The name sent a shiver through the gathered warriors. The Ow's She, the people of the mounds, the fair folk, the immortal ones. The legends told of their beauty, their power, their enchantments. Some called them gods. Others called them thieves of men's souls. Conla shook his head, gripping the apple tighter. "She did not trick me. She did not threaten me. She only offered me a choice." Finn's gaze hardened. "And did she tell you the cost?" Conla hesitated, the memory of her words echoing in his mind. "A life without sorrow, without fear, without death. I would be free," he said quietly. Finn exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "Free, you are my son. You are a warrior of this land. Do you think freedom is found in fleeing your people?" He gestured to the apple, his expression dark. "That is no gift, Conla. It is a chain." Conla's chest tightened, frustration sparking through him. "You do not understand." Finn slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing through the hall. "No, you do not understand," he thundered. "The Ow's She do not give freely. Everything they offer is given with one hand and taken with the other. Their gifts are lures, their promises snares. You think she offers you peace, but what she offers is a prison." Conla pushed back from the table, rising to his feet, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. "A prison," he demanded. "And what is this life, then? What is this path you have forced upon me since the day I was born? Am I not already in chains, bound by duty I never chose?" A silence fell over the hall, thick and heavy. The warriors shifted uneasily, glancing between father and son. Finn's expression darkened. "You were not born to choose, Conla," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You were born to lead." Conla shook his head. "Then, perhaps, I was born for the wrong world." The words left his lips before he could stop them. And once spoken, they could not be taken back. Finn's eyes flashed with something unreadable: anger, sorrow, fear, all woven together in a storm that did not break. He sat still for a long moment, his hands tightening into fists against the table. Then, with forced calm, he turned to one of the older warriors standing nearby. "Summon Oisin," he said. "Tell him to come at once." Conla frowned. The druid. Finn did not look at him. "You have been touched by the other world. If this enchantment has taken hold of you, it must be severed before it is too late." Panic flared in Conla's chest. "You think I have been cursed?" Finn's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. "I think you have been claimed," he said grimly, "and I will not lose my son to the fair folk." Conla opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, the heavy doors of the hall swung open, and an old man stepped inside. Oisin the druid. He moved with a quiet authority, his long silver hair falling past his shoulders, his robes trailing against the stone floor. Though his face was lined with age, his eyes burned sharp and knowing, as if they had seen beyond the veil of this world and into the next. "I was told it is urgent," Oisin said, his voice like the wind through ancient trees. Finn gestured toward Conla. "My son has been touched by one of them," he said. "He has eaten their food." Oisin's gaze snapped toward Conla, his expression darkening. He stepped forward slowly, studying him, his eyes flicking to the apple still clutched in Conla's hand. He did not speak for a long moment, as if weighing something unseen. Then finally he exhaled. "It is as I feared." Finn stiffened. "What do you mean?" Oisin turned to face him. "He has already begun to slip from this world." Conla's stomach dropped. Finn's jaw tightened. Then what must be done? Oisin's gaze remained fixed on the apple. The owls she do not relinquish their chosen easily. This fruit is a tether, a bond that ties him to their world. So long as he eats from it, he will grow further from us. His hunger for mortal food will fade. His ties to this land will weaken. He looked at Finn, his face grave. If nothing is done, one day he will vanish, taken fully into their realm, and he will never return. A cold dread settled in Conla's bones. Finn's expression hardened. "Then break it." Oisin hesitated. "I can attempt to sever the connection," he said carefully. "But if his heart is already set upon the other world, no magic of mine will be enough to keep him here." Finn turned to Conla, his voice a quiet command. "Give him the apple." Conla's grip on the fruit tightened. He looked between his father and the druid, then down at the apple, feeling the warmth of it against his palm. It was a simple thing, small, unassuming, and yet it held the promise of something greater than this world, something beyond duty and expectation. He thought of her, the woman on the hill, the way her voice had wrapped around him like a song only he could hear. Give him the apple. Conla met his father's eyes, and slowly he shook his head. Finn's face darkened with fury, but Conla only took a step back, the apple still cradled in his palm, because in that moment he knew this was only the beginning. The tension in the hall was thick, every gaze fixed on Conla as he stood before his father and the druid, the apple cradled in his palm like a secret no one else could touch. A low crackling from the fire was the only sound, yet it did nothing to ease the weight pressing down on him. Finn's fury burned in his gaze, sharp as the blade of his sword. "You refuse?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Conla swallowed hard. "I cannot give it up." Oystein exhaled softly. His old eyes filled with something between pity and understanding. He turned to Finn. "It has begun," he murmured. Finn's fists tightened at his sides. "What has begun?" "The pull," Oystein said. "The call of the otherworld. He has eaten their food. It lives in him now. The longer he holds to it, the more he will change." He turned his gaze back to Conla. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice quiet, measured. Conla opened his mouth to deny it, to claim that he was still himself, still whole, but the words refused to come. Because he did feel it. The weight of this world had begun to lessen. His body felt lighter, as though the earth no longer pulled at him with the same force. The sounds around him were dulled, distant, while the memory of her voice, of her touch, was as vivid as if she were standing beside him now. Yes, he wanted to say, "I feel it," but instead, he lifted his chin, meeting the druid's gaze with silent defiance. Finn took a slow step forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the hall. "Then we break the spell now," he said, his tone final. "I will not lose my son to the fair folk." Oystein hesitated. "It is not that simple, Finn of the 100 battles." "It must be," Finn snapped. "Tell me what must be done, and I will see it through." The druid studied Conla carefully, his gaze lingering on the apple. He must eat mortal food again, real food. He must let go of the fruit and take nourishment from this world, or his body will cease to belong to it. Finn nodded sharply. "Then we will make him eat." At those words, Conla took another step back, his heart hammering. A strange fear bloomed inside him, something primal, instinctive. They could not take the apple from him. The thought sent a rush of panic through his veins. It was irrational. He had eaten normal food all his life, had never once hesitated to break bread at his father's table. And yet now, the mere idea of it felt wrong, as though to taste anything other than the apple would shatter something fragile inside him. Finn's gaze darkened at the way Conla recoiled. "You see," he said, turning to Oystein, "it has already poisoned his mind." "Not poisoned," Oystein corrected grimly, "but changed. The magic of the owl's she is not like ours, Finn. It does not work with force, but with longing. He is being drawn into their world by desire, not by curse. To break this spell, you must sever that desire." Finn turned back to Conla, his jaw set. "Then we will do whatever is necessary." Conla knew what was coming before his father even moved. The moment Finn reached for him, instinct roared to life inside Conla. His body reacting before his mind could catch up. He twisted away, his grip tightening around the apple as though it were the only thing anchoring him in place. A sharp ripple of energy shot through his limbs, so subtle he might have imagined it, yet real enough to make his breath hitch. Finn lunged again, faster this time. Conla barely avoided him, stepping back toward the doorway, his pulse pounding. "Conla," his father barked. "Enough of this. I won't let you take it," Conla said through clenched teeth. Finn's eyes flashed with something dangerously close to desperation. "Then you leave me no choice." In one swift motion, he signaled to the warriors flanking the hall. Conla barely had time to react before hands seized him, strong, unyielding grips closing around his arms, his shoulders. He struggled, but they were trained men, fighters hardened by years of war, and their strength overwhelmed him. "Hold him," Finn commanded. Conla thrashed, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "Father, don't do this." Finn ignored him, turning to Oisin. "Bring the food." From the long table, a servant hurried forward, carrying a plate of bread and roasted meat. The scent of it filled the air, rich and warm food that once would have made his stomach ache with hunger. But now, it smelled foreign. "Wronged." Oisin stepped closer, his voice firm but calm. "Eat, Conla. Take one bite. That is all it will take to begin breaking the spell." Conla pressed his lips together, shaking his head. The warriors holding him tightened their grip. One reached for his jaw, fingers digging into his skin, forcing his mouth open. Panic surged through him. No, a piece of bread was shoved between his lips. He struggled, the taste of it overwhelming, dry and lifeless on his tongue. His body rebelled against it, nausea rising in his stomach. And then, a sharp jolt shot through him. It was as though ice had flooded his veins, as though something inside him was being wrenched apart. His breath hitched, his vision flickering. The warmth he had felt since that first bite of the apple gone in an instant, replaced by a hollow, aching void. His knees buckled. The warriors loosened their grip, just enough for him to collapse onto the stone floor, his breaths coming fast and uneven. Finn stood over him, his face unreadable. "It is done," he said, but Conla knew it was. Something inside him had changed, yes, but not in the way his father had hoped. The absence of warmth, the sharp, cutting emptiness, it was unbearable. Like a song that had been silenced mid-note, leaving only the echo of what had once been. And in that moment, he realized the truth. He did not belong here anymore. His father thought he had saved him. But in trying to pull him back, Finn had only made the choice clearer. Turna en Og was not a curse. It was home, and he would return to it, no matter what. Conla lay on the cold stone floor of the hall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body trembled, not from weakness, but from something deeper, something more profound. The warmth that had filled him, the lightness that had whispered of another world, had been torn away. He felt raw, hollow, as if a part of him had been ripped from his very soul. The warriors had stepped back now, their task complete, but their wary gazes lingered on him. They had seen the struggle, felt the unnatural strength that had surged through him before it was broken. They did not understand what they had witnessed, but they knew, without words, that something beyond their comprehension had taken root in him. Finn stood over him, his broad shoulders set like the walls of a fortress. "It is done," he said again, but there was no victory in his voice, only certainty. Condla pushed himself up onto his hands, his limbs weak, his mind fogged with a dull ache. The taste of bread still clung to his tongue, bitter and dry. It had been meant to anchor him back to this world, to break the pull of the other world. But instead, it had only made him realize how much he no longer belonged. Slowly, he raised his head and met his father's gaze. "You think you've saved me," he said hoarsely. Finn's expression was unreadable. "I have brought you back to yourself." Condla let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "No, you've only shown me the truth." He lifted the apple from where it had rolled across the stone floor. Even now, it remained perfect, untouched, as if it had never left his grasp. "This was never a curse," he murmured. "It was a gift." Finn's jaw clenched. "Then you are blind." Condla pushed himself fully upright, swaying slightly, but regaining his balance. The warriors around him shifted, uncertain, as if expecting another struggle. But he did not run. There was no need. His father could not understand. He never would. Oisin, the druid, stepped forward, his ancient eyes filled with something like sorrow. "You feel the absence, don't you?" he said softly. Condla met his gaze, and for the first time, he let himself admit it. "Yes." Oisin nodded solemnly. "That is the pull of the other world. It does not come in shackles, but in longing. It does not steal, but it calls. And those who hear it can never unhear it." Finn exhaled sharply, turning to the druid. "Then tell me, Oisin, can it be silenced?" The old man hesitated, then finally spoke. For a time, but never forever. Finn's gaze darkened. He turned back to Condla. "Then we will keep trying." The words sent a flicker of unease through him. Finn would not let this go. He would fight to keep his son here, to sever the tie that bound him to something beyond mortal reach. He would never accept that Condla had already chosen another path, and neither would the woman. The realization struck him like a sudden gust of wind. She would return. She had promised. And when she did, there would be no more chances to hesitate. Condla closed his fingers around the apple. "I will not fight you, father," he said quietly. "But you cannot fight this." Finn's nostrils flared, his expression thunderous. "I will fight until I have my son back." A silence stretched between them, heavy with everything left unspoken. Then at last, Condla turned away. He did not run. He did not plead. He simply walked out of the hall, past the wary gazes of the warriors, past the torches that flickered against the stone walls, past the life that had once been his. Outside, the night air was crisp, the scent of the earth rich with the promise of rain. He inhaled deeply, closing his eyes for a moment, listening to the distant rustle of the wind through the hills. And in that wind, he swore he heard a voice. Soon, the word was barely a whisper, but it sent a shiver down his spine. She was waiting. He knew now that he would return to her. The only question left was how long he had before his father tried to stop him. The next days passed in a blur, filled with watchful eyes and careful movements. Finn had ordered his warriors to keep Conla within sight at all times, whether in the training yard, the feast hall, or even in sleep. There was always someone nearby, but Conla did not resist. He played the part of the obedient son, biding his time. Each night, when the halls fell silent and the warriors drifted into sleep, he sat by his window, gazing out at the distant hills, waiting for her. The ache in his chest grew stronger with each passing day. The mortal food he forced himself to eat felt like dust on his tongue. Nothing could compare to the taste of the apple. Nothing could fill the void it had left. And then, on the third night, the wind shifted. A hush fell over the land, unnatural and still. The torches lining the walls flickered, their flames bending as if drawn towards something unseen. Conla's breath caught. She was here. He rose from his bed, moving to the window, his pulse thrumming in his ears. Outside, beyond the watchful torches, beyond the wooden walls of the stronghold, the hills stretched dark and endless beneath the sky. And at the crest of the hill, she stood. The moon cast a silver glow upon her, her gown shimmering like woven starlight. Her hair drifted in the night breeze, and her eyes gods. Her eyes were locked on him, filled with quiet patience, with knowing. Conla's heart slammed against his ribs. She lifted a hand, not in beckoning, but in promise. He knew without words what it meant. It was time. A tremor of anticipation surged through him. He had waited long enough. He would not be kept here any longer. Tonight he would leave. Tonight he would follow her, and he would not return. Conla's pulse thundered in his ears as he stared out at the distant hill where she waited. The night stretched vast and endless between them, the torches of his father's stronghold burning like tiny stars against the darkness. His breath was steady, his decision already made. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the certainty of what had always been calling him. The guards posted at his door were not fools. Finn had ordered them to watch him closely, to prevent his escape. But they did not understand the nature of the call that bound him now. They thought they could keep him with stone walls and iron discipline. They did not realize he was already slipping beyond their reach. The apple, cool and smooth in his palm, pulsed with quiet warmth. It was time. He moved quickly, silently. He had trained for war all his life, trained to be unseen in the night, to strike without warning. But this was no battle, no enemy to defeat. This was escape, not conquest. The guards did not stir as he slipped past them. The torchlight cast their faces in soft, flickering shadows, and for a moment, a pang of guilt struck him. These were his father's men, his men, but they would never understand. By the time they realized he was gone, it would be too late. He passed through the courtyard, keeping close to the walls, the cool night air wrapping around him like a cloak. The wooden gates loomed ahead, shut for the night, too heavy to move without rousing the watchman above. But Condla did not head for the gates. Instead, he turned toward the far wall, where the stones were worn smooth by time and weather. It was not an easy climb, but he had done harder things before. His fingers gripped the cracks between the stones, his muscles straining as he pulled himself upward. The night was silent, but for the faint rustle of wind through the trees beyond. The torches along the wall cast jagged shadows against the stone, their flickering glow a heartbeat away from revealing him. He moved fast, every breath measured, every motion precise. And then he was over. His feet hit the damp earth on the other side. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. The path to the hills stretched before him, dark and untouched. The air smelled of rain and wild grass, of something deeper, something older. He ran. The wind tore past him, his heart hammering with exhilaration. Every step carried him further from the world he had known, closer to the world that had been waiting for him. And she stood at the crest of the hill, unmoving, watching. As he neared, she smiled. "You came," she whispered. He stopped before her, breathless. "I was always going to." She studied him, her dark eyes filled with something deep, something unreadable. "You have left much behind," she murmured. He hesitated. For the first time, he allowed himself to think of his father, of the hall he had walked through 1,000 times, of the warriors who had fought beside him, of the life that had once felt so inescapable. But there was no doubt in his heart. He met her gaze, his voice steady. "I have left behind only what was never truly mine." A slow, knowing smile touched her lips. She reached for him, her fingers cool as they brushed against his hand. "Then come," she whispered. A shimmer passed through the air, the world around them shifting, bending. The stars above seemed to tilt, the ground beneath his feet growing lighter. It was as if the earth itself was unraveling, making way for something beyond mortal reach. The wind carried her voice like a song. "It is time, Condla." He stepped forward, and then a voice sharp and commanding shattered the air. "Stop." The spell wavered. Condla turned. His father stood at the base of the hill, Finn of the 100 battles, his figure dark against the night, his presence vast as the sky itself. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his cloak whipping in the wind, but his stance was firm. He had come alone, no warriors, no weapons drawn, only him. Condla's throat tightened. He had known, deep down, that Finn would not let him go so easily. The woman beside him remained still, watching. She did not pull him forward. She did not urge him to run. This choice, as it had always been, was his alone. Finn took a step forward, his voice steady, though pain laced its edges. "Son." Conla swallowed hard. "Father." The silence between them stretched deep, filled with everything they had never said. Finn's eyes burned with something fierce. "You do not have to do this." Conla exhaled shakily. "I do." Finn's fists clenched at his sides. "Why? Why would you leave your home, your people, everything I have built for you?" Conla hesitated, not because he doubted his decision, but because he did not know how to make his father understand. "I was never meant for this life," he said finally. "I have felt it since I was a child, and now I know why. There is another world, Father, a world where I belong." Finn's gaze darkened, his voice dropping to something almost pleading. "You belong here with your family, with me." Something sharp twisted in Conla's chest. He loved his father. That had never been in question. But love was not enough to hold him here. "You have always been a warrior," Conla murmured. "Your path was clear. You fought, you conquered, you led." He swallowed hard. "But that is not my path." Finn's breath came heavy, his jaw tight. "And you think this world she offers you is real, that it will not vanish the moment you step into it." Conla glanced at the woman beside him. She did not speak. She did not try to convince him, because she did not need to. He had already made his choice. Conla turned back to his father, his grip tightening around the apple. "Yes," he said, "I know it is real." Finn's expression did not break, but there was something in his eyes now, something raw. "You are my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I would fight any battle to keep you here." Conla's heart clenched. He wanted to tell his father that this was not something he could fight, that this was not an enemy to be conquered. But instead, he stepped back. One step, two. The woman's hand found his, her fingers lacing through his. The moment their skin touched, the world around them shimmered, the air thick with magic. Finn took a step forward, but it was too late. A gust of wind roared around them, the sky twisting, the ground shifting beneath their feet. Conla held his father's gaze one last time, and then the world disappeared. A rush of air tore past Conla as the world around him unraveled. The stars above blurred. The solid ground beneath his feet dissolved into nothingness. And for the briefest moment, he felt weightless, adrift between two worlds. The wind carried whispers, voices too distant to understand, yet filled with an ancient, knowing song. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation ended. He was standing once more. The night was still, the air thick with an unfamiliar warmth. A golden glow surrounded him, unlike the cool silver light of the mortal world. The sky stretched above, vast and endless, painted in hues of twilight that never faded into true darkness. Beneath his feet, the earth was soft, covered in grass that shimmered as though woven from starlight. Conla turned, his breath catching. Turna en og. It was beautiful beyond words. The land stretched endlessly before him, rolling hills of emerald and gold, rivers that glowed like liquid sapphire winding through the valleys. Great trees stood tall, their leaves whispering in a language he did not yet understand. In the distance, he saw white towers rising toward the sky, their spires catching the light like frozen fire. And at the heart of it all, the woman stood beside him, watching. She smiled, her dark eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. "You have crossed the threshold," she murmured. "You are home." Conla's heart pounded. He felt it, truly felt it. The weight that had always pressed upon him, the burden of expectation, the hollow ache of longing, it was gone. In its place was a lightness, a sense of belonging that he had never known before. He was free. A breath of laughter escaped him, unbidden, filled with something close to relief. He paused, turning in a slow circle, drinking in the impossible beauty of this world. "It's real." The woman chuckled softly. "Did you doubt?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "No." He looked back at her, something unspoken passing between them. "But I feared I would never reach it." She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "And yet, here you stand." Conla let out a slow breath, the last remnants of his old life fading from his mind. Finn, the hall, the warriors, the battles he was meant to lead, they belonged to another world now, one he had left behind. For the first time in his life, he did not feel torn between duty and desire. For the first time, he felt whole. The woman extended her hand. "Come," she said gently. "There is much to show you." He hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her fingers were cool, yet the warmth that spread through him at her touch was unmistakable. She led him forward, and as they walked, the very air around them seemed to hum, the land itself welcoming him. They passed through fields where flowers bloomed in colors he had never seen before, petals shifting in the breeze as though dancing to music only they could hear. They crossed bridges of silver stone, arching over rivers so clear that he could see the sky reflected in their depths, though no clouds drifted above. It was a world untouched by sorrow, a world unburdened by time. And yet, a shadow of doubt flickered deep within him, a whisper of something left behind. He pushed it away. The woman led him to a great hall, its walls gleaming like pearl, its high doors carved with intricate symbols that pulsed with faint light. The entrance opened before them without a sound, revealing a space unlike any Conla had ever known. It was vast, filled with golden light that seemed to have no source, its ceiling lost in a soft, endless glow. Fine silks draped from above, shifting in an unseen breeze, and the scent of honey and wild fruit filled the air. Figures moved gracefully within, men and women, all of them fair, their faces untouched by age, their laughter like the ringing of silver bells. They looked at him with curiosity, their their smiles welcoming, their eyes knowing. One of them, a man with hair like woven sunlight, stepped forward. "He has come," he said, his voice rich with something ancient. The woman beside Conla inclined her head. Yes. The golden-haired man studied Conla for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "You will be happy here." Conla opened his mouth, uncertain of what to say. But before he could speak, a figure appeared at the far end of the hall. She moved toward him with effortless grace, her gown flowing behind her like mist, her presence commanding yet kind. Her hair was dark as the night sky, her eyes filled with wisdom that stretched beyond lifetimes. Conla knew, without being told, that she was their queen. She stopped before him, studying him with a quiet intensity. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Welcome, Conla," she said, her voice like the first notes of a song. "You have left behind the burdens of your world. Here, you shall know only peace." Her words wrapped around him like a soft embrace. No burdens, no sorrow, only peace. And yet, that whisper in his chest, that shadow in the back of his mind, did not fade. He pushed it away once more. He had made his choice. He was here now, and there was no going back. The days in Tur Na and Og passed like a dream, though Conla could not say how many had gone by. There was no night here, no creeping shadows or fading light, only a golden sky that never darkened, a world bathed in soft, eternal glow. Time had no hold in this realm. He did not hunger, did not tire. He moved through the land as though weightless, surrounded by beauty so perfect it was almost unbearable. The rivers sang. The air carried the scent of honey and flowers, and laughter echoed through the halls like music. He should have been happy, and yet something was wrong. He could not name it. He could not explain it. But deep within, there was an ache that would not fade, a whisper of something he had left behind. The Queen of Tur Na En Og watched him closely. She did not question him, did not scold him, but she saw. One evening, or perhaps it was morning, for there was no difference here, she called him to her. They stood upon the cliffs that overlooked the endless horizon, the sea below still and gleaming, never restless as the waters of his old world had been. "You are troubled," she said, her voice gentle. Conla hesitated. "I do not know why." She studied him for a long moment. "You have all that was promised to you," she said. "You have left behind sorrow, burden, and fear. You will never grow old. You will never suffer." "I know," he murmured. "And yet," she said, tilting her head slightly, "you are not at peace." Conla exhaled slowly. "It is not that I regret coming," he said carefully. "It is only, I thought it would feel different." How? He shook his head, frustrated with himself. "I thought that once I was here, I would feel whole." The Queen's dark eyes softened. "You are mortal still, Conla. No matter how much of this world you take into yourself, you came from another. And that world will always call to you, a cold realization washed over him. It had not been his father's spell, nor any trickery of men that had placed doubt in his heart. It was something deeper, something no magic could sever. You are bound to your old world, the queen continued. It is not a curse, nor a weakness. It is simply what you are. Condla's hands clenched at his sides. Then, why bring me here, if I will never truly belong? The queen's lips curved into a knowing smile. Because you wished for it. He fell silent. You sought freedom, she said, and freedom was given. But there is one truth that even the owls she cannot change. She turned to him fully now, and though her face remained calm, her next words struck like a blade. Freedom always comes with a price. Condla swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had thought the price was leaving behind his people, leaving behind his father, his name, the weight of duty that had pressed upon him for so long. But now he realized the price was something else entirely. It was the knowledge that no matter where he stood, part of him would always long for the other world. You are not the first to come here, the queen said, her voice softer now. And you will not be the last. Some find peace in eternity. Others, she paused, her gaze searching his. Others learn that what they sought was not escape, but purpose. The weight of her words settled deep in his chest. Had he ever truly wanted to escape? Or had he only longed for something more, something he had not yet found? The woman who had brought him here appeared then, stepping from the shadows, her beauty untouched, her presence steady as ever. But when she looked at him, there was something new in her eyes. She knew. She had always known. You are restless, she said softly. Condla let out a slow breath. Yes. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool as they laced through his. Then tell me the truth, Condla. He turned to her, his heart hammering. If you could return, she asked, would you? The question sent a shock through him. Return. He had not thought it possible. He had believed that once he stepped into this world, the path back was closed forever. But now, standing on the cliffs, the golden sky stretching endlessly above, he was forced to face the truth. He did not know. For so long, he had believed that he did not belong in his father's world, that he was meant for something else. And here, in Terna and Og, he had found beauty beyond imagining. He had found peace, but peace without purpose was just another kind of prison. His father's words echoed in his mind. You belong here with your family, with me. And for the first time, Condla wondered, had he been searching for freedom? Or had he been searching for a place where he was needed? The woman's grip on his hand tightened slightly. You do not have to answer now, she murmured, but you must decide soon. His heart pounded. Why? She exhaled, and for the first time, he saw something close to sorrow in her eyes. Because the longer you stay, the harder it will be to leave. A chill ran through him. You are still bound to your world, she continued. But in time, that bond will fade. The longing will fade. And if you remain here until then, she hesitated. then whispered, "You will forget." His breath caught. Forget. Forget his father. Forget his home. Forget the life he had once known. Turna and Og was eternal, untouched by time. And he would be eternal too, if he stayed. But at the cost of everything that had once made him who he was. The choice he had made had never been about leaving one world behind. It had been about choosing which part of himself to keep. A deep, trembling breath passed through him. "I need time," he said finally. The queen nodded, as if she had already known what he would say. "Then take what time remains to you." But as she turned away, Condla knew the time for choosing would come sooner than he was ready for. The days, or what passed for them in Tur na en Og, grew heavier with the weight of Condla's thoughts. The beauty of the land had not faded, nor had the wonder that had first filled him when he arrived. And yet, something inside him had shifted. He no longer felt weightless in this world. The peace that had once soothed him now felt like stillness. The endless golden sky, the ever-blooming fields, the laughter that never ceased, it was paradise. But it was not his. The queen had spoken the truth. His longing for the world he had left behind had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. And with each passing moment, the warning echoed in his mind. "If you stay, you will forget." He sat by the river one evening, his hands resting on his knees, watching the way the water shimmered as though filled with captured light. The woman, the one who had brought him here, the one who had first spoken his name on the hilltop, stood beside him in silence. At last she spoke. "You are ready to choose." He exhaled. "Am I?" She nodded. "The pull of your old world has not left you. That means the path remains open for now." Condla swallowed hard. "And if I wait too long?" She did not look away. "Then one day you will wake, and the thought of returning will no longer cross your mind. The name of your father, the faces of your people, will drift into shadow until they are nothing but a forgotten dream." A shiver ran down his spine. For all the wonders of Tur na en Og, the thought of forgetting his father, of forgetting who he had been, terrified him. His hands clenched into fists. "And if I leave?" The woman's expression was unreadable. "Then you return to the world you knew, a world of sorrow, a world of battle, a world where you will grow old and die." Condla's breath was steady. "But it is my world." A silence stretched between them. Finally, she reached into the folds of her gown and produced something small, something he had not seen since the night he had first stepped into this realm. The apple, still whole, still gleaming, still untouched by time. "This is the last gift I can offer you," she said, pressing it into his hands. "Take it with you. If ever you change your mind, if ever you wish to return, eat of it once more, and the way will open to you again." His fingers curled around the fruit. It was warm, pulsing with a quiet, steady energy. He looked up at her, his heart pounding. "You are not angry." A faint, bittersweet smile touched her lips. "No," she murmured. "I knew from the moment you hesitated that this world would never truly hold you." Conla exhaled, his chest tightening with something he could not name. "I will not forget you." She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes gleaming. "Perhaps." Then, without another word, she stepped back. The air shifted. A sudden wind rose around him. Not the soft breezes of Turna and Og, but something wilder, something raw. It wrapped around him, lifting his hair, tugging at his very soul. The world shimmered, and then he was falling. The golden sky, the endless fields, the shining rivers, they dissolved, unraveling like mist in the morning light. A rush of cold air slammed into him. The scent of earth filled his lungs, and when he opened his eyes, he was standing on the hill once more. The night sky stretched above him, dark and star-scattered. The wind was sharp, the grass damp beneath his feet. He could hear the distant howl of wolves, the crackling of a fire from his father's stronghold below. He was home, but something was wrong. A noise, heavy, hurried footsteps, echoed from the trees. Conla turned just in time to see a figure emerging from the darkness, broad-shouldered and battle-worn. His expression, a storm of disbelief and fury. "Finn," his father stopped short, staring at him as though he had seen a ghost. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice rough with emotion, Finn said, "You were gone." Conla's throat tightened. "I came back." Finn took a slow, unsteady step forward. "How?" His eyes searched Conla's face, as if he feared he was still dreaming. "How are you standing here before me?" Conla hesitated. How could he explain? How could he put into words the world he had seen, the choice he had made? Instead, he said the only thing that mattered. "Because I chose to." Finn inhaled sharply, his hands clenching at his sides. He looked like he wanted to be angry, wanted to demand answers. But instead, he only let out a heavy breath. "Then you are truly my son." The words struck deeper than Conla had expected. For so long, he had thought that leaving would make him free. But now he understood. It was not about leaving. It was about choosing where he belonged. And he had chosen this world. His father stepped closer, his gaze dropping to Conla's hand. His eyes darkened. "You still hold their fruit." Conla looked down. The apple rested in his palm, warm and whole, untouched by time. A promise, a doorway, a choice that would always remain. Slowly, he closed his fingers around it. "I do," he said simply. Finn's jaw tightened, but he did not speak against it. He only studied his son for a long moment, then nodded. "Come," he said at last. "The men will want to see you." Conla hesitated for only a moment before following. The path down the hill was familiar. The distant glow of the stronghold flickering through the trees. And as he walked, he felt the weight of the apple in his palm. He knew he might never use it, but he also knew deep in his heart that part of him would always wonder, would always remember, and that, he realized, was the true price of his choice: to live in this world, to die in this world, and yet to always feel the pull of another. The stars above gleamed bright and endless, and Condla walked on, knowing that he had made his choice, and that choice was his forever.